years ago today, I came here to Parliament Square to witness the so-called Brexit party, which was the festival of celebration to celebrate the moment that the UK finally left the EU. It was, as I recall, packed with people. This was before we knew anything about COVID, of course. And there were celebrations, people drinking beer. There were some more sinister goings-on, some people burning EU flags. But it was definitely a day of high expectation. 4 years on from that, let's consider how Brexit has really affected the UK and how positive it's been. When it comes to immigration, which was obviously a key theme of the Brexit referendum, there's a mixed response as to how much of an impact it's had on the UK. According to the most recent figures from the Migration Observatory, migration from the EU has fallen since 2016 and since the actual Brexit changes came into force. However, overall migration from other countries has risen. This government is now trying to tackle what we call a small boats crisis, which is unofficial asylum seekers travelling across the Channel from France to the UK. It's been a big challenge for the Premiership of Rishi Sunak and his predecessors, and it's an interesting topic when looking at how Brexit has impacted migration. Some people argue that the potential deterioration in relations between the UK and France has been a detrimental factor that has caused small boat crossings. However, when you look at other European countries like Greece and Italy, they've also been dealing with the same problem. So it's difficult to pin it on Brexit. But overall, the message of cracking down on immigration if we leave the EU has not been something that we've seen in reality. Another massive issue with Brexit is trade. We had long promised deals with India and the US to look forward to, neither of which has come to fruition. Last week, the government actually announced it was stepping back from trade talks with Canada for the same reason, arguing that unless we were going to be getting a really truly beneficial trade relationship, we weren't interested in entering into it. So there's been some crucial disappointments. That said, trade deals take a long time to be agreed, and we have had progress with countries like Japan, Australia, New Zealand. The UK also recently joined the CPTPP with a host of other countries. It's not exactly a trade deal, but with tariff-free trade and agreements on food standards, it sort of fills in for where trade deals haven't been agreed. If you ask anybody in the Conservative Party or the government what one of the real benefits of leaving the EU was, they would say without hesitation that the access to the COVID vaccine was an area where we saw the benefits of being out of a bloc of multiple countries where everything has to be agreed together. There's no doubt that the UK had access to the vaccine sooner than its European counterparts, and part of that was the ability to be able to go it alone without EU approval. As reported by my colleague Richard in a read over the weekend, economists estimate that the cost to the economy is between 75 to 125 billion pounds every year, which amounts to up to 3% of GDP. It's difficult to quantify exactly the economic impact of Brexit, especially during the last few years when we've had other world events such as the pandemic and global wars and general challenges with geopolitics. However, I don't think anyone's making a very strong case for arguing that at the moment we're seeing a financial benefit from leaving the EU. Whether or not that might change in the future is hard to say. In 2019, when we last went to the polls, one of the biggest factors for voters was the phrase, "Get Brexit done." And it was a huge driver behind the success of Boris Johnson forming his majority in Parliament. This year, that just doesn't seem to be the case. When you ask any polling company and anyone doing focus groups, the top issues for people are the NHS and the cost of living. Also taking into that the recent economic strains we've had with inflation. So Brexit is just not expected to be a primary factor again at this election. However, that's not to say that it won't be a talking point. I expect the Conservative Party will want to discuss Brexit and Labour's stance on it because they think it might help them in the polls. Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has said repeatedly that he would want to forge closer relationships with the EU without agreeing to anything such as freedom of movement or anything close to joining the single market. However, he's been relatively vague on exactly how this would work, and I imagine the Conservative Party will want to capitalise on this and try and make Brexit the prominent issue again. Whether or not that will fly with the British public remains to be seen.